Well, good evening, good evening, good evening. This is Dr. Johnathan Alvarado, and you have tuned in to the Global Pentecostal Perspectives live stream on tonight. Yeah, I missed you too. I'm glad to see you weighing in. I'm glad to see you checking in. Bless your wonderful heart. I'm looking forward to seeing and being with you on tonight. Call a neighbor, call a friend, let them know that Global Pentecostal Perspectives is on the air, that it is good to see each and every one of you. Good to see you. Good evening and praise the Lord Jesus Christ. God is our refuge and strength. He's a very present help in the time of trouble. So good to see you. Thank you for weighing in from where you are, from Columbus, Ohio, from Chicago, Illinois, from Dallas, Texas, from different parts of the country. Come on and weigh in and let us know exactly where you're coming to this stream, where you are situated in the country and in the world. I'm excited about tonight. Tonight's a banner night, a stellar night. Tonight is an incredible night. I'm going to, come on, put it in the chat, put it in the stream. Call a neighbor, call a friend, let everybody know that Global Pentecostal Perspectives live stream is up and running, and that we are excited about the conversation that we're going to have tonight, all the way from Reading, Pennsylvania. Thank you, Pam Johnson. We miss being here. I'm excited to be on the stream tonight. I'm excited to be able to host this conversation. I've been managing family matters for the last 2 weekends. The last time we were together was 2 weekends ago, but I couldn't let this Saturday night go because this begins. All right, Vinny Hundy, it's been a long time, bud. I'm glad to see you with your musical self. We have been out for the last couple of weeks, particularly in light of the fact that we've had significant death in our family, and we've been managing and attending to issues of our family and our home, and making sure that we are appropriately prioritizing our emotional and spiritual energies to make sure that we keep everything moving forward as would honor God and keep our family constituted. So go on and like and subscribe and tag. If you're watching by way of YouTube, hey, like this video and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notifications bell so that way you'll always know when Global Pentecostal Perspectives is coming on the air. You'll always get a notification when we're coming forward with a new video, with a new live stream like we are on tonight. We want to make sure that we connect with our viewing audience in very significant ways. If you're on Facebook, on the GPP Facebook page, or on my Facebook page, or on Pastor Tony Alvarado's Facebook page, a couple of the places we broadcast, make sure that you like and share and tag family and friends and let them know that Global Pentecostal Perspectives is on the air. I see several of you have weighed in, and so I'm looking to see some others. I want to give you the opportunity to come on in and make sure that others are on the stream with us on tonight. I have an exciting guest. I'm looking forward to our time together with him, a friend and a colleague of so many years. And I want to announce to you, and I'll make this announcement periodically over the course of tonight's broadcast, about the symposium on Pentecostal spiritual formation. We did in May on Pentecost weekend a symposium on Pentecostal spirituality. Well attended, many of you all that came out. But our next one is going to be on August 20th and 21st. It's a Friday and a Saturday. Our guests will be none other than my bride, Dr. Tony Alvarado, who is an expert in spiritual formation, in women's issues, women in leadership, women in theology, etc., as well as self-care and wellness. But spiritual formation is one of her main emphases, and of course, preaching. And so she is an expert, and a fully orbed expert, and not just how we're psychologically, emotionally, and physically well. Not only how preaching contributes to our spiritual formation and our wholeness in those aspects, but also the didactic fundamentals of spiritual formation, and particularly Pentecostal formation. Also, Dr. James Bowers will be with us on that weekend, sharing particular insights from a Pentecostal perspective on spiritual formation. So I'm looking forward to each and every one of you joining us on that weekend. Hey, good evening, Bishop Davis. So glad to see you, Bishop Clinton Sterling Davis. Good to see you on here on tonight. So glad you could make it. We're going to work toward understanding our Pentecostal roots on tonight. And I have a great guest that's going to be sharing with us on tonight. And so I'm really jazzed to be able to move things forward and hear what the Spirit is saying to the church and understand what practices and insights that you and I are engaged in that are connected to the history of the holiness Pentecostal movement. And so I have brought in an expert in Afro ecclesiology and who's going to be sharing with us on tonight. And I'm looking forward to all that's going to happen, all that's going to occur on tonight. Now, listen, if you're deriving any value out of the Global Pentecostal Perspectives live stream, I want you to like it. I want you to subscribe to it. I want you to share with it. And I'll even present to you some other ways whereby you can support the GPP channel. All right. We're going to come back with our guest in just a moment to Global Pentecostal Perspectives. Well, I told you, Dr. Percy Johnson is in the house tonight at Global Pentecostal Perspectives. I tracked him down. I pulled him off of his private jet, got him off of his itinerary so he can hang in here with us. Dr. Johnson is a friend and colleague here in the city, a brother beloved and a scholar par excellence. He's a gift to the body of Christ. I'm so glad you're here tonight. And while I'm advertising the symposium that's forthcoming, listen, on GPP, y'all get more bang for your buck than y'all realize. Got Percy Johnson on here tonight. In a couple of weeks, friend and sister, Dr. Anthea Butler, was solidifying her date to come on to talk about her new book, White Evangelical Racism, The Politics of Morality in America. I had a preliminary conversation with a friend and brother, my big brother from Morehouse College, former president of Morehouse College and a Morehouse man, class of 1975, a scholar in his own right, an ethicist who teaches at Candler School of Divinity and the Emory University Graduate Division of Religion, in the person of former dean of the Colgate-Rochester Theological Seminary, in the person of Dr. Robert Michael Franklin. So we've got several guests that are lined up over the next several weeks that are going to add value to your life. And if you're deriving any value out of the stream, listen, all we ask is that you like and that you subscribe, and perhaps if you're so moved, and I'm hoping that you will be, you'll even consider financially supporting us in some way, and I'll talk about those ways as we go forward. But tonight, y'all, we got history. My brother on tonight, Dr. Percy D. Johnson Jr., is a great friend and gift. We met years ago. We've pastored in the same city for over 20 years here in the city of Atlanta. Dr. Johnson has a passion for counseling, which grows out of a desire to see human beings maximize their full potential, claim and reclaim their authentic selves, and collaborate relationally with other human beings and their partners in healthy and a happier way. He presently is pursuing, has pursued and obtained a licensure in marriage and family counseling, and as a pastoral and Christian counselor. He holds a doctoral degree in pastoral counseling from the United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, and completing a second doctorate in sacred theology. He's completed a master's degree in divinity from Vanderbilt University and a Bachelor of Science from Troy State University in Troy, Alabama, and Associate of Arts degree in General Studies from the James H. Faulkner State University in Bay Minette, Alabama. His pastoral and therapeutic style includes integrating psychotherapy and spirituality. This process entails cognitive, behavioral, relational, emotive, and psychodynamic techniques and perceptions in conversation with diverse theological and spiritual interpretations and understandings. By doing this, he creates sacred space, safe spaces, wherein human beings feel respected, honored, valued, nurtured, and safe. The goal of this type of approach is to assist human beings in the healing process, help them hear their inner voice, their inner child, and the things that are lost oftentimes in the fire. This man of God is, I got to interrupt my own reading of his bio to tell you that this is what's going to be important in a post-COVID world. In a post-COVID world, recovery, health, and healing is extremely important. He's been sharing as a pastor, as a counselor, as a seminary professor, having served for over 2 decades at ITC, the Interdenominational Theological Center here in Atlanta, Georgia, Beulah Heights University in the Division of Religious Studies. We've worked together in those places together for 15 years at Beulah Heights, and he's continued to work there and actually was working there prior to my arrival. He's a published scholar, having published in peer-reviewed journals, periodicals, and having contributed to edited volumes. He's a gift to the body of Christ and a scholar par excellence. And again, he's a brother beloved. I want you all to welcome and greet and receive tonight our dear friend and brother, Dr. Percy D. Johnson, Jr. So glad to have you, man. Thanks for coming on with me tonight.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm always glad when I can share some time with you and engage you in conversation and dialogue. So my soul and my spirit jumps every time I get into the same space and place with you.
Well, you've been a welcome friend. Being here with you. You have been a welcome friend and a wonderful resource, man. The work that you've done, that we did together at the university, the work that you've done over at the church when we brought you over there, and now tonight, I was telling Dr. Johnson, this marks tonight, the first Saturday in July, marks the beginning of the second full year of GPP. We started on the third Saturday of June of 2020. And we went for one full year, and it dawned on me before I called him to come on, I've been going for a year on GPP, and I haven't had Percy Johnson on here with me. So I picked up the phone, and I called him. I said, I got to have you, man. I can't go to another year without having Johnson on here. And he so graciously accepted my invitation, and he's on here with us on tonight. I'm so glad. Aloha, weighing in, Dr. Johnson. Elder Judy Kirk is weighing in from Hawaii. She's out there on vacation, but she's on GPP with us tonight. So we got a multiplicity of states represented.
Tell her I said hello. It must be nice to just be able to chill and take it easy.
It must be nice, man. Must be nice. I tell you what, I'm excited. Listen, y'all, I want to dive right into the topic, and I don't want too much of our time to get away from us. But again, precious dears, if you are deriving any value out of Global Pentecostal Perspectives tonight, I want you to like it. I want you to subscribe to it. I want you to share it. I want you to tag friends and family members and let them know, send it out within your circle of influence and let people know that GPP is on the air live right now and that they can indeed come on in and hear this conversation and contribute to the conversation. Dr. Anyango Gregory is on, one of our colleagues and precious daughters, my daughter and your colleague at Beulah Heights. She's excited, amen, to hear from Dr. Johnson and as a Beulah Heights University colleague. And so it's great to have you on tonight. Listen, here's our topic. The modern Pentecostal movement is deeply rooted in spiritual and religious traditions centering around African spiritualities, American revivalism, and restorationist theologies. Too often, the storied roots of our Christian tradition are obscured by broader evangelical sensibilities and fundamentalist leanings. Tonight, on Global Pentecostal Perspectives, I, along with Dr. Percy Johnson, are going to dialogue on understanding our Pentecostal roots, the streams and trajectories out of which and into which Pentecostalism has come and is going. I'm excited tonight about our conversation. I'm excited about having Dr. Johnson on tonight. Dr. Johnson, you want to say anything to the waiting stream audience, and then I'll just start asking questions if once you've made some opening comments.
Well, I really do appreciate this, and as Dr. Alvarado, I love having conversation about the influence of African and African American experience into our faith formation, and to talk about how these human beings were able to integrate those perceptions as they came to this shore and faced human degradation. How did they utilize that faith? How they utilize their critical thinking perceptions in order to address multitude of situations and circumstances that were traumatizing, that violated the core, yet this spiritual construct that they created, it began to empower them and strengthen them and them together to not only endure, but to navigate and to ultimately ascend beyond those situations. So anytime I can engage in this kind of talk, it is exciting to me.
Outstanding. Well, we're excited to have you. So let me ask you then, you've already begun to answer this question. And what are the striking features to your mind of the roots of Pentecostalism as you understand? What are some of those striking features?
Well, one of the things that in the book by Lawrence Mamiya and C. Eric Lincoln is that they talk about Pentecostalism, and they talk about it as a desire and a need of human beings to experience God in an extraordinary way. I mean, with Wesley, you hear about John Wesley and his movement of the Holy Club. You hear him coming to Georgia. You hear about the Moravians. You hear about all of this, but we very rarely hear how that Pentecostalism, really these Methodist individuals, they began to seek something more connected, something more empowering, something more enlivening, that even though they had these practices and even though they had these perceptions, they felt it was something that was more at the core of them that was necessary. And they started seeking holiness. They started seeking this power that would sustain them in the midst of the trauma. And Ian McRoberts said, the roots of Pentecostalism and American holiness is in the Black experience. He said, no, you can't move beyond that, because these Africans came over here with a core and recognized the ring, shout, dance that would move into devotion, to praise and worship, this sense of the ecstatic moving them beyond the present human condition, and then empowering them to face it with an assurance of the presence of God. All of those were empowered, and they're important to understand as Pentecostalism takes its form, which is, again, what Azusa Street starts building on.
You know, this is such an incredible thing, because now you're talking, when I hear you bringing in Wesleyan spirituality that is so heavily influenced by Moravian piety, which finds its ecstatic expression in Africanisms. It's like this perfect storm that's connecting here on the shores. You talk about Georgia and Wesley's failed experience in trying to evangelize the natives and breaking away with the norms of the Anglican Church. But here's my thing. Why is so much of that history that you're talking about oftentimes lost in evangelical renderings and tellings of Pentecostal story? Why is so much of that experience? You talk about Ian McRoberts' seminal work on the Black roots and white racism of early Pentecostalism is the title of that book.
There we go.
So he's got this marriage of two dynamics going on. that I think maybe. So why to your mind is some of this history? I mean, I'll tell you. I have talked to some of my precious white brothers and sisters, Pentecostals, who are oblivious, oftentimes,
Yes.
to the root, Dr. Coletta Vaughn, of the Black experience, as you have articulated and affirmed. Bishop Coletta Vaughn is on here with us tonight, I see, and she's already commented that this idea of the roots of the Black experience being the substratum of the Pentecostal movement, though you took it further back than that. I was hearing your good Methodism coming out, and when you brought in Wesley, and surely if indeed William Seymour is the father of the modern Pentecostal movement, and I believe he is, John Wesley is the great grandfather of the movement. John Fletcher in between. I'll just say that. Let it go with it. But,
well, I think one of the things that we constantly hear, even when you look historically, you look at the African roots of Western Christianity. We want, in this culture and in this country, we cannot identify this connection and this foundation being on this African continent, that wait a minute, African people did not come here, and they were not little children who were mindless drones. That these individuals came with a spiritual core, with a spiritual understanding that laid a foundation about who is God, human interaction, human community, this God that suffers with us, the transformation theologically. We can't do that because it shifts the power dynamic. And as Dr. King said, it moves us away from this individualism, this exploitation, this three-tier that isolates and denigrates. It moves us more into the human family, which is this African core that turns around and said there is a divine in each and every one of us, which needs to be honored, which needs to be respected, and that these African people came here to testify and to lay that foundation and carved it out. So we can't say that because it undermines this capitalistic hedonism, individuality, and this exploitation.
So now the paternalism with which then the Christian European Christianity has superimposed itself on African spirituality tends to portend that Africans came, as you said, in a very childlike, mindless, hedonistic, heathen way of being in the world. But what I'm hearing you to say is Africans were deeply spiritual, highly interconnected, wonderfully grounded with a theology proper about who the supreme God is, with a particular worldview, theistic worldview, that they were not here with this kind of, I know we always talk about African sensibilities as pantheistic, and we realized, I was offer this apologetic for Johnson and I, we realize that when we say things broadly like African sensibilities, African spirituality, we're speaking in very broad generalities. And we do not in any wise mean to diminish the unique idiosyncratic ways in which different parts of Africa and different peoples of Africa have both understood and approached God. But in broad and general ways, people like Walter Hollenweger, Ian McRoberts, as you have already referenced, C. Eric Lincoln, E. Franklin Frazier, Albert Rabateau, Melville Herskovitz, and others, they've understood, tapped into, and appreciated some of the spirituality that Africans bring. And dare I say, on Global Pentecostal Perspectives, that some of our spirituality isn't necessarily, we didn't derive that from being Christian. We added it to the Christian milieu.
Right. Yeah, there is a work, Africans in American Culture, by Joseph Holloway. And he talks about Africanisms, and he talked about what we brought to this country. And even if you go back, even if you want to go back to the Hebrew Bible, as Dr. Weems would say, if you go back to the Hebrew Bible and you really critically explore it, you're going to see these Africanisms. You're going to see Kemetic thought that comes out. You're going to see the Code of Hammurabi. You're going you're going to see the 42 negative confessions. You're going to see them. So these, as you said, I don't want to overgeneralize, but to say that Africans had no core and that they came here and that these wonderful Europeans came in and gave them this is a lie. And we need to start really wrestling with what were these Africanisms? Why the ring shout dance? Where did that come from? Where was this need to work the spirit? And what was all of that about as they talked about this God of this cosmic mountain? What did they understand about spirituality and life, and not a bifurcation or a polarization of the sacred and the secular, but an integration of both of them? And how did they understand that? And what did that mean as they endured life experiences and connected with God? Why did they go to the Hush Harbor and Brush Harbor? What was these secret places where they continue to seek God? Why was that necessary? Because it helped them connect, to endure, and to conquer their situations, and to feel connected, not just to life, but to be connected to each other and the God that gave them life. As you listen to their slave conversations, or as one writer, Sterling Stuckey, would say, this enslaved thoughts of human beings being enslaved, and how they would address it and respond to it rather than allowing that system to define them.
Johnson.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now, I know your expertise as a pastoral theologian. I may be pushing beyond the scope of that, but I want to ask you then. So what of Christianity in Africa prior to the diasporic slave trade? Because oftentimes the narrative is the justification and apologetic for the chains was that our chains brought us to Jesus, as if we had no cognizance of Jesus particularly, and this cosmic God, supreme God, in a broader and a more general way. So what of that idea that spirituality for Africans was not just general spirituality, but there was a very vibrant Christian spirituality in Africa prior to the diasporic slave trade? What say you to that?
I would say that all you have to do is go back and take a look at Yeshua, which we call him Jesus, Yeshua, and the multiplicity of writings that would suggest that there was an African underpinning of the way. If you want to go and look at the Markan gospel and where that evangelical movement started in there, as they talk about, when I say evangelical, I mean missionary movement of conveying these thoughts, this Yeshua movement inside of Judaism and how it transitioned. And if you want to go into the Eastern and certain segments of the Western side of, from Moreau, all you got to do is go back and look and see that there is this understanding of this followers of the way versus this Christianity. They were following a belief system, an understanding, a way of life. And so to sit back, one of the things several individuals have gotten into is that they say, well, most of the Africans that came here, that they were of the Muslim faith. An aspect of it is that no, they were not. They were more tribal religions, and they were bringing a multiplicity, as you have just argued, a multiplicity of belief systems and Yeshua movement and this Christianities is because there were multiplicity of expressions of Christianities. And so, but we don't talk about that. We just think because our European enslavers and oppressors came back and say, this is how you do it, because it benefited them and their power dynamic and their culture and status quo, instead of let's look at these expressions.
Wow.
So I say that's a lie.
And that's a whole big conversation, but I'm glad. I mean, I just want to hear other scholars affirm the idea of Christianity and spiritualities that are not connected. I mean, every time you hear of spirituality, oftentimes from from our European brethren. They are speaking in terms of rescue, that Africans and we were rescued from animism and rescued from spiritism, and rescued from demon possession, and rescued from witchcraft, and rescued from voodoo, and as you have said, what we're coming to discover is what my bride, Dr. Tony, just said. It benefited them and their power dynamic. So the gospel that we received from them, the gospel, and I use air quotes intentionally, was a gospel of empire, not the kingdom of God, but the empire of the European settlers. And there's a difference between the Basileia Chao Theu and the empire of man.
Right.
So I think that those dynamics oftentimes are omitted. And if we're going to understand our roots, we have to understand our rootedness in the liberative praxis of the spirituality, whether it was Christian spirituality or not. It was a liberative spirituality. It was an integrated spirituality. It was a holistic spirituality.
Right.
It was a non-bifurcated spirituality. It was not, as you have said, not the one that would separate sacred from secular, but it would see an integrated ontology where all life is sacred, all life is integrated. Sacred. So is it then appropriate to credit African spiritualities for informing Pentecostal spirituality? Is it appropriate? Some, my dear friend and colleague Wolfgang Vande says, I oversell African spirituality as an influence. Is it appropriate to credit African spiritualities, broadly speaking, to Pentecostalism in the modern movement? And if so, why so? If not, why not?
I think a part of it is, if you deal with numerous scholars like C. Eric Lincoln, Lawrence Mamiya, you go to Holloway, you go to scholars who have studied the progression of Pentecostalism, as well as, even if you look at Church of God in Christ, and you look at its informing of these other, what they call off branches of this spiritual movement, you have to go back and connect it to those essences of this Africanisms that were undergirding, that was informing theologically images of God. What does it mean to be in community? What does it mean to experience the dunamis? What does it mean to have exousia? What does that mean, not just in words and thought, but what does it mean as you talk about world transformers, community transformers, life transformers? So no, sir, I would stand with you every day and say, you are not overselling that. And there'll be numerous scholars who will turn around. Stuckey would talk about it. They would begin to talk about, even if you read some of the works about The Soul of the Black Preacher, by a Christian Methodist Episcopal bishop, Bishop Joseph Andrew Johnson Jr., you would hear him talk about transformation of mind, connection with the spirit, and then an engagement with life in transforming that life in alignment with God, this creating God. And that's going to fall right into the Wesleyan quadrilateral, which then turns around and talks about scripture, reason, experience, and tradition impacting how we formulate. And that came straight from, if you go back and start reading African theology brewed in African pot, you will go right into it. So yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm standing with you, Bishop.
What you say? Yeah, Andre Price, Vanda is my friend and my teacher. I studied under him, but he pushes back on me with that. He says I give too much credit, and he credits more American revivalism as having influence on par with African spiritual sensibilities. And I, like Dr. Johnson, twist up my face and say, nah, American revivalism itself was influenced by African spiritualities. Them old dancing Methodists of the 19th century, they got that, them white Methodists got that dancing stuff and ecstatic behavior from the slave tradition. They observed slave preachers and slave expressions. And so I think that I'm falling out with them. I have to be careful of what I say, because so many of my white brethren are on this stream, and I love them dearly. And we're colleagues. We go to SPS, Society for Pentecostal Studies, together, and we participate together along that line. But part of the what most people don't realize, Johnson, is that in the academy, not to disagree, but to find someone's work interesting enough to offer a counterpoint is not a mark of a breaking point. It's actually an affirmation of the work, that your work is worthy of my attention. And so I say that to say Wolfgang and I are cool. Wolfgang Bondi and I are cool. We there. I'm not down on him. I'm just saying because he's a friend and a brother, and I love him dearly. Okay, so let me ask then this next question. What then of the excesses of Pentecostalism? What of snake handling, anti-intellectualism, exclusionism? We're the only ones saved. Ain't nobody else saved. What you got that Methodist man on there for tonight? He ain't even saved. These things have characterized our movement and are rooted in some of our most ardent traditions as Pentecostals. What of these things?
I think one of the challenges, as you have identified, is this literal interpretation. This need, for me, from a psychoanalytic standpoint, is this need of being out of control, having no control, and utilizing these tenets to try to gain some sense of control, some sense of guarantee, some sense of, if I do this, there's going to be this outcome. So because I don't have control in these other areas, I'm going to stand on this because this gives me control. This
puts me in control.
And so I'm going to be That's it. That's the whole deal. That's the whole deal.
Wow.
And we've seen it in a lot of psychoanalytic works that talk about that individuals who really don't seem to feel in control of of their own selves, they need to control other people. So they can't deal with their vulnerability. They can't deal with the uncertainty. They can't deal. So by being exclusive, by being this sense of, here are these words, if I do this, then I now have control in some sense. And therefore, I need to stand on that. So
even control of my eternal future. If I do this, a formulaic salvation that says, if I do this, do this, do this, do this, now I'm in control of my eternity. And if you don't do this, do this, do this, and do this, then you're not saved, because I can't control you unless I can tell you what it is. And these have been some of the excesses of the Pentecostal expression. But I think that the rootedness that you began explaining to us, the rootedness of Pentecostalism in a desire for more, a desire for a deeper spirituality, which didn't begin with us. It began with, all through the history of the Christian faith, there's this notion of from the patristic fathers, the desert fathers came. The desert fathers, when Christianity waxed old, they moved out into the deserts and into monasteries and into communes because they wanted to have a deeper, more effectual relationship. So this has been the pattern of Christendom, where there's this heightening and then a dropping off. So then another movement would emerge and then drop. And the Pentecostal movement seems to be the newest of these movements of Christianity that has sought a deeper. So how do we then mitigate the propensity for this psychological certainty and control? Peter Enns wrote the book, I can't remember the title of the book, but the idea is that God requires our faith more than he requires our certainty. Mm-hmm. That we in the contemporary church have replaced biblical faith with psychological certainty. And as you were talking, this idea, the need to be in control, is this issue. And I don't want to try to tread in this territory wherein you are expert in the psychoanalysis, this idea of psychological certainty. So if I can convince myself of this so-called or presumed biblical formula for my own salvation and the salvation of others, even though I'm removing the spiritual self-agency from others in so doing,
Right.
I am more comfortable with the psychological certainty that I am saved and thus I am in control of my eternal future. And perhaps I'm even control of those are around me. Slave master would preach a gospel that kept him in control of the slaves that he sought to Christianize.
Right. There is a book I would invite anybody to take a look at. It's called When the Roll is Called. It's by Marie T. Hoffman. It's again When the Roll is Called. It's an older book, but it's about trauma and the soul of American evangelism. And what she says and what she argues is that evangelicalism, particularly when you talk about white evangelicalism, the aspect of it is, Bishop, is that they were told to separate the trauma and to move more toward. And she goes back into early evangelical voices, and she said, separate the trauma, separate the suffering, and focus on the eternal. Focus on, so you don't deal with what's happening here in life or your situation, because that's too painful. What you do is you focus on something, as you were just articulating, that you can control, which is, if I follow the Deuteronomistic historian, if I do this, blessing. If I do this, cursing. There you go. And so that's my guarantee. And I need this guarantee. And ultimately, as Dr. Walter Brueggemann say, I can then control God. And my desire is to control God and the outcome.
Now, you know, food around brought Brueggemann in the room. What you gonna do? What you gonna do to us tonight? I think this is so important because the idea of the African roots that support Pentecostal spirituality, one of them is the idea of self-agency and community self-agency, whereby we're not in control. Yes. We're following the mandates of the Spirit. We're not. There's no superimposition of someone else's superior spirituality. It's communal in that my spirituality depends upon your spirituality and the mutual engagement thereof. But neither of them are operating in the power dynamics of who's running whom, who's telling whom, who's saved, who's not saved, who's in, who's not in. And the need, I mean, I thought about snake handling, which for the record, Black folk didn't do that. That was white folk in Appalachia. That was, you know, that's some of the roots of even where I went to seminary, the Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee, has some branches that were involved in snake handling. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It was white Appalachians that did that. But part of that is, I mean, there's power and control. I am imbued with the power of the Spirit. I'm controlling these elements around, as opposed to recognizing that God has given agency to these things, and perhaps a misinterpret of the Spirit poured out on all flesh. Them snakes had the Spirit poured out on them too, because the Spirit didn't just fall on human flesh; it fell out on all flesh. Snakes were doing what snakes do. I'm just saying. I think that that dynamic has to be taken into serious consideration as a part of one of the things I'm doing. I'll be transparent with you. You're my brother. One of the things I'm having to do, both as a bishop in the Lord's church and as a Pentecostal believer, is reevaluate how much I actually believe that the Spirit is guiding, that the letter kills and the Spirit makes alive. How much I do need to trust in spiritual self-agency, not just of myself, but the spiritual self-agency of the ones that I'm tasked to lead.
Yes.
That perhaps the power dynamic between pastors and parishioners has been so maligned that it lends itself then to some of the abuses that we see from pulpit to pew.
Yeah. I think that when we take a look at that, as you start talking about the power dynamic, um, we have and she was my professor in psychoanalytic thought. Um, I had Dr. Peggy Way, and I had Pamela Cooper White. And Pamela Cooper White was the one that starts talking about this relational dynamic between God, the Yeshua, or Jesus of Nazareth, and the Holy Spirit. She says that the whole deal that we have messed up is that we don't see this relational interplay that
Wow.
needs to be reworked, that we have gotten this sense of top down rather than a relational
Sure.
interplay, and that this whole interplay should be embodied in the congregation between the pastor and the congregation, that there is this God, this Holy Spirit, this Yeshua word, all of this interplay that needs to work. And she says, go back and take a look at it, that when Moses goes up and he sits there as a Pharaoh, and he does not sit with the people and then begin to spread out and get across the people and set up this leadership that is more collaborative, that all of a sudden it falls apart, that we begin to start seeing that. So that African sense, that Kemetic sense of not having a God with us in an embodiment of Pharaoh, rather than a God with us in each one of us working toward God's created plan and purpose, that is more of this interplay.
And that is more African in its spiritual sense. This
Very much so.
social, we always talk about the economic trinity, how the Father works, how the Son works, how
Right.
the Spirit works,
Mhm.
but we do not talk about the dynamics of the social trinity, how
Yeah.
they interact and interplay one with
Right.
the other. That is not the kind of conversation that we have. And as Pentecostals, I believe we need to have that kind of conversation because the Spirit oftentimes is at play in the midst of
Yeah.
us. And so that relational dynamic, if the Spirit is indeed God in us, then there is this, that's a relational proposition. Listen, friends, if you are deriving any value at all from tonight's conversation, will you please like and subscribe to the GPP YouTube channel? I need to push over 3,000 subscribers in our second year. I'm sorry, up to 5,000 subscribers in this year. We're at 2278. I need to push us over 5,000. The first year of our existence, we almost did 2,500 subscribers. I'd like to see that go over 5,000. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe today. If you're here on the channel and you're deriving any value, like it, tag somebody, share it with somebody. I believe that it'll benefit them and you. Perhaps you're even so impacted and influenced by this conversation tonight with Dr. Percy Johnson and Dr. Johnathan Alvarado that you're willing to sow and to share and to give. Our Cash App is scrolling on the screen. Our PayPal is coming across there. I've been out for 2 weeks. We haven't done a stream in the last 2 weeks. Some of you all I know been holding an offering saying, Dr. Alvarado, I want to help. I want to take this. I know when you do symposia, that costs money. I know when you add equipment, that costs money. I know when you have guests, that costs money. And I want to help you. I'll tell you how you can help. If 100 of you tonight would say, Dr. Alvarado, I want to give you $20 to be of benefit and blessing to GPP, that would help tremendously. So I want to encourage you to do so on tonight in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, as we are having this conversation about understanding our roots. Okay, so then the next question then, is Pentecostal spirituality then, understanding more of its roots, a viable spiritual pathway for the future of Christendom? I oftentimes hear people discussing the disintegration, the depletion, the exodus of Christian faith, people leaving. It seems like churches, denominations, particularly in the West, are getting smaller and smaller, and all the kind of stuff that people are saying, and the truisms that we may be discovering in all of that. But the question I'm raising with you is, with all of that in mind, with the roots of Pentecostalism, as you have articulated and through the history of Methodism and the Holiness movement and all the way back into our African spiritual sensibilities, Is that for you a viable pathway for the future of Christendom? Last thing I'm going to say before I turn you loose to talk, and that is, it seems that many persons in other mainline traditions are opting toward what I would describe as Pentecostal spirituality, at least phenomenologically. I mean, Baptists ain't Baptists no more, they full gospel Baptists.
Right.
Methodists was dancing in the 19th century, but by the 20th, they stopped. Now they back to dancing again. Ecstatic behavior, tongue speech, laying on of hands. I mean, not to mention the charismatic Catholics, charismatic Episcopalians. Even the United Methodist has a branch and a degree program at your alma mater in the charismatic Methodist Church. I mean, is that to you, is Pentecostal spirituality to you a viable path forward for the future of Christendom? And if so, why? If not, why not?
Do I think yes. And the aspect of it is that when you look at Pentecostal African spirituality, particularly in that Pentecostal where it is going, it really is this kind of field that I'm doing now. It is an integration. It is at the core of it that while I can stimulate cognitively their thought process and challenge it, cognitive behavioral reframing talks about understanding and integration of thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, and how they lead to action, decisions, and the understanding of framing it in something that Dr. Gregor Clark Ellison says is something that is larger than just me. COVID has caused many of us to feel isolated, detached, which is triggering issues of abandonment and rejection. And therefore, Pentecostalism and its African roots helps bring us back communally that, wait a minute, I belong. Self-esteem. I now feel some sense of beingness that is beyond me, and which ultimately connects me with the community and with this divine God nature. So yeah, they want to stimulate on multiple levels, which we, called holistic ministry. They trying very much to do what Pentecostalism was doing. It was empowering them to understand a God in them and with them that was empowering them with enough dunamis and exousia to transform what Dr. Brueggemann would say is reality. You transform reality because you're now connected to God and others. So yes, sir, I do believe that. Yes, sir. I got to feel something. I can't just come in there and hear it. I got to feel something.
Come on, man. Something that integrates the brokenness of my COVID existence, that reintegrates me into the communal nature of my African existence, that provides for me a raison d'etre beyond my individual life into a more communal way of being in the world. Man, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. That's a therapeutic. That's a therapeutic theology or ecclesiology in a post-COVID world. I want y'all to hear what you just heard him describe in thumbnail is a therapeutic ecclesiology for a post-COVID world, rooted in Pentecostal spirituality, even more deeply rooted in Africanisms. I think that is just as viable and as powerful as I have heard it. I have not seen it from that, but that's the purpose for Global Pentecostal Perspectives. I've not seen it from that perspective, that therapeutic, integrative perspective. That this is as much an exercise, how we go back to church, how we re-engage after an 18, 20-month COVID separation, how that is as much an exercise in pastoral psychotherapy as it is in spiritual reintegration, in gathering, in all of those dynamics. And this may be a little afield of the topic, but I'm persuaded that perhaps we haven't taken, maybe others have done so more than I, but perhaps we haven't taken this seriously enough. And we're looking to get back together in an embodied way, gathering again, but haven't considered the reintegration of lives after trauma.
Right.
And COVID was trauma. And all that we experienced, we watched George Floyd die in that time.
Right.
We watched Breonna Taylor die during that time. We were revisited with the memories of Tamir Rice and all of it. Michael Brown and all of those all of those traumas that we, at least prior to COVID, we could go to church and that's what everybody was talking about. And we could dance it out and shout it out. But we've had to internalize and deal with these things individually and separated. So our trauma has been compounded over this COVID. And you're the first person that I have heard articulate that in a theology of reintegration in the context of a pastoral psychotherapeutic approach imbued with Pentecostal spiritual sensibilities.
I think that again, individuals are now, even when you start looking at, if we look at the New Testament, the majority of it, Bishop, was written in a very volatile and traumatic world. And what you just addressed was what we call complex trauma, anticipatory trauma, secondary trauma, and then multi-layered action trauma. In other words, the aspect of it is if you think about it, we are bombarded continually all day, police brutality, numbers about intra-ethnic and inter-ethnic violence committed by individuals in close proximity, drive-by shootings, road rage, families that are disintegrating. We're starting to see intimate partner violence. We're starting to see child trauma. It's every day. We're on a platform that constantly bombards us. And then we don't think about it as we talk about our somatic, our bodies, that this whole sense of our bodies holding this, and then it's speaking to us, telling us, because anticipatory trauma has to do with this sense of, when is it going to happen to me? Might it happen to me? And then there is what is called epigenetic trauma, which means that, and they did it when they studied individuals who had endured World War II. Their grandchildren started having nightmares. And so their grandchildren would have these nightmares, and they would tell them the nightmares, and the nightmares were identical to the traumas that their grandparents had endured in Buchenwald and during World War II. So the aspect of epigenetic trauma that they did the research, and the research came back and said, because of the trauma that your grandparents endured, it changed at the chromosomal level in your DNA. It changed who you are. They started doing it with African Americans who had experienced traumas in it and have then got studies that show that at the chromosomal level, we are impacted. So you got triggers going off that you don't know are going off inside of you that are revisiting those events. And if you want to look up African American race and trauma, and you're going to get it. Epigenetic trauma. That's what it is. And so these events that's going on are triggering us. So when you read some of those New Testament stories, as you talk about Yeshua asking, how long has this been going on? How long has it been in this book? This boy is living out a traumatic reintegration in that context. It's not just that event, it's been multiple generations, because they've been enslaved. And that's the reason why I constantly tell a lot of preachers, stop calling them slaves, because when you do that, you devalue their humanity. They were human beings that were in a context that had institutions and systems that hindered their ability to reach their God-ordained or God-created purpose, which King would say, you just lack power. because power is the ability to manifest the purpose that God has placed deep inside of you. So now you dissociated and disconnected from yourself. And as John Henry Clark said, now you living as an alien in your own body.
I don't care who sends me some money. I'm sending you an offering. You getting an offering from me. I tell you what, Percy Johnson, that is just powerful. Golly Moses. Listen, gang, you all know the deal. Our routine. We're in the last 30 minutes. I want you to put in your questions. Michael, Malcolm has sent in a question, Dr. Johnson, and the rest of you, if you have questions or comments or want to express, I want you to put it in the stream so we can address it. Dr. Alvarado and Dr. Johnson, do you think that we will return to community after this trauma? Would you say that the trauma we faced is exasperated by our indoctrinated individualism? I'll let you deal with that. And then don't let me forget that Dr. Miller caught that, what you said. I'm hoping that others did too. That whole idea of stop calling us, they weren't slaves, they were enslaved.
Yes.
There's a difference. One speaks to our condition. One speaks to our ontology. Who we are is human beings created in the image of God.
Yeah.
Our condition was that we were enslaved.
Right. Yeah. That we were enslaved. That was systems. And I should have known that Michael Malcolm was gonna get at that question. I do believe, Michael. I'm just gonna call you Mike. I do believe, Michael, that this individualism has caused us to end up moving away. I think the hedonism and what Parker Palmer calls the empty self. Parker Palmer says that where the empty self, where God should reside, that the aspect of it is that we have begun to try to fill the void with consumerism and hedonism and individuality. Sure. Can we begin to replace it after COVID? Yes. I think that is, if we use Pentecostalism, if we use this sense of African liberative hermeneutics, that we need to be sensitive to what nature is saying about our human relatedness to God, to creation, to one another, that we have put a different God on the throne, and it is time to remove that God and to remember that we are interdependent and that we are interrelated, and that what impacts you impacts me, and that if we start again going back into Yeshua's message of our survival being dependent upon our ability to live communally and harmoniously and in an egalitarian society, and if we begin to honor creation, I believe that we can come back. I believe that we can confront this individualism, this hedonism, and this commercial capitalism that has commodified our personhood and therefore causes me to see a person as a thing, or this mindset and some of these messages that suggest that either I'm the predator or I'm the prey, and I choose to be the predator. So when we start really challenging and confronting, that's it. Unless we start confronting that and stop celebrating that in our messages, in our hermeneutics, and in our theological lens, until we stop celebrating that and start challenging it, I think that our communities are going to continue to be decimated, which I think nature is telling us.
I think nature is speaking that to us in a multiplicity of ways, not the least of which is these 38 cities that have the highest heat records. Nature is telling us that we're doing stuff wrong. I think that there's so much that you've said that can be understood in the light of Pentecostal spirituality, and particularly the communal nature of Pentecostal spirituality, which comes out of our Africanness and our African understanding, but also that African understanding of a shared existence, a worldview that seeks to share resource, share space, share life, share existence one with the other. you were talking about the biomechanical and biophysiological responses. Dr. Anyango Gregory, our precious daughter and colleague and sister in the Lord, put the title of a book, "The Body
Right.
Keeps Score:
Right.
Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma" by Bessel van der Kolk. And so I think that if she recommends it, I know it's a good one. And
It
so
is.
it's in the chat, friends. If you want to see that, that's in the chat. The Body Keeps Score. One of our ministers, Juanita Butler, says, "I tend to believe that the events have awakened and empowered our self-agency, and we will be stronger communally." I agree that it has brought it to the fore. I'm hoping, praying, believing for an awakening. I'm wondering if as much awakening there is, if the awakening is as polarizing as I'm seeing it now, because some people who are still and I don't want to play on the word awakening, but woke is the obvious term, and I don't want to take us too far afield. But the reality of the matter is that the root of the liberative nature of Pentecostal spirituality and the substratum of deepening our Christian faith is, to me, the essence of what needs to be brought out in this hour for post-COVID survival, for national survival. I believe that our nation is going to really, really be further divided, further torn asunder, if we do not understand those two things: the liberative nature of Pentecostal spirituality and the deepening of our Christian claim, as was the substratum of early Pentecostals and other previous movements. Capitalism, individualism, those things tear away at the very fabric of not just being Pentecostal, but being Christian. And I believe that if we don't, and they're disintegrating not only the community, but ultimately that disintegration is carcinogenically infiltrating the self. We are disintegrated individuals.
Yes. Yeah. I would build on that. I think the aspect of it is, I think you, Bishop, are hitting right on it. I think that Dr. King, when he came back after receiving the Nobel Prize, he turned around and began to question the very impact that capitalism, commercial capitalism, was having on human beings and human worth. While we look at it through, as you say, our African and our African American experience, the aspect of it is that we were always seen as a thing. We were always seen as non-human. We were always as a commodity to edify and to elevate. Well, if you really take a look, as Dr. King said, at capitalism, capitalism has to have a permanent underclass. It must have a slave class. It cannot advance. And so that's the reason why later on you start seeing his Christianity and his lens and his approach begin to take more of a system of economic and political struggle toward justice and toward democratic communality. And so you unless we start really rethinking that and really start focusing on human beings, Yeshua saying, I came that they might have life, and that life more purposefully, more abundantly, more joyously, whichever translation you want to go with it. Well, a lot of us are just existing, and we don't live because, as Dr. Thurman would say, Howard Thurman would talk about, go and ask what makes you come alive. There are a lot of not alive. We're just existing in this world because our focus and our value system is based upon something that we hope will fill a void, rather than trusting in the divine, navigating the waters in our soul and our spirit, coming to the altar of our sacred selves and laying down, trusting that this God that has created us is able to sustain us and to direct us and provide. And so that's again, that whole sense of that spiritual African core that lays at the root and the foundation of Pentecostalism.
And then I think Pentecostalism has the unique opportunity to take that core and expand it, and because of the ubiquity of Pentecostal phenomenology throughout the body of Christ, and the ubiquity of Pentecostal spirituality transcending different cultures and different places, I think that it has the inroads into various communities. But it is very much what you're describing, the commodification of the human person in the enslavement of Africans, the commodification of human beings in the work law, child labor laws and things in the Industrial Revolution, the commodification of the human being, even in the beauty industry where women are commodified and their bodies
Right.
are commodified. I think that all of these things are outworkings of a system of government that militates, and a cultural system that militates against a liberative message of spirituality that comes out of Africa and finds its greatest expression in Pentecostalism. And the sad thing for me is that even some of my white brothers and sisters that are Pentecostal oftentimes embrace that system wholeheartedly and put it on
Right.
par with their Christianity, and the two, they don't even see that the two are diametrically opposed and fundamentally incompatible. It's a,
Yes.
it's an incredibly tenuous place to have to kind of walk through that understanding. Because as you referenced Dr. King, listen, when Dr. King was talking about one day my sons and daughters will join hands with white children and all that, when he was talking about joining hands, singing songs, worshiping together, they gave him a Nobel Prize. But when he was up there in Memphis
Right.
advocating for wages for garbage workers and dealing in
Right.
economics and politics and speaking out against the war in Vietnam, holding hands, Nobel Prize. Economics and
Right.
politics, they gave him a bullet.
Yep.
And part of the problem in our country is they are good with us as long as we talking about holding hands.
Right.
Some of my friends, I love them, and they'll be okay as soon as the swelling goes down. We were cool. We were tight. I'm talking about some of my white Pentecostal evangelical brethren. When I was silent on white evangelicalism and the way that it is fueled, empowered, and given rise to the nationalism that ends up on January 6th with the national insurrection that some of them won't even articulate as an insurrection, and some won't even
Right.
speak up against the duplicity of a Mitch McConnell or the tomfoolery
Right.
and the other debased nature of a Donald Trump,
Right.
or they will have to repristinate Trump's existence, calling him Nero or calling him Cyrus, or trying to make it into something, trying to make chicken salad out of. But the point I'm making
Yeah.
is that they're doing all this gymnastics to
Right.
maintain the power structure.
That's it.
And that's what it's all about. And I believe that Pentecostalism has the opportunity and the spiritual effervescence to be able to turn not only the tide of the church, but to impact the culture as we did in the first century. I just wonder if we'll embrace Pentecostalism in its holism, not just for its phenomenology,
Right.
not just for its tongue, speech, and dance, but for its revolutionary, that's necessarily revolutionary character that I hear you describe, and its healing balm, its integrationist healing balm.
I think that one of the things that I think you really captured well is this revolutionary aspect of Pentecostalism that Michael Malcolm would say that really understands this interrelatedness, what Brueggemann would call this circular relationality between God, creation, humanity, human beings, and other human beings back unto God. It's this circular sense. So when you use capitalism and you use this duplicity, as you say, when you have these political games, what it does is it extorts and exploits every aspect of that relationship. It uses God, it pimps God and the message of God so that it can pimp creation, so then it can exploit the created. And so all of a sudden, there is this whole propaganda that then is mimicked as this God of creation, when really it is, as Dr. Gardner Calvin Taylor would say, a God that we have created. And so we have created this God that extorts and exploits creation, the creator, the created, so that some can benefit at the expense of all of these. And so now we are sitting back and I hope that these brothers and sisters that's hearing you really hear your heart and your message that talks about a radical Pentecostalism that recognizes this relationality. Because Pentecostals, when they start talking about healing and they start talking about that, they were using nature. They recognized that nature was in relationship with God, that they were in relationship with God and nature, and that as much as they maintained that healing, they could come up with nature and come up with natural remedies, and then they could heal the body, and the body could heal itself because there was this harmonious relationality that then put us back in an equilibrium, and then that balance would then move toward reconciliation. Excuse me.
Johnson, say something to this. Deborah Patterson raises a great question. But if we take into account that we are marketed as a commodity, then how do we keep our spiritual selves and beliefs from becoming a commodity that is sold to the highest bidder?
The aspect of it is your first part. But if we take into account that we are marketed, a lot of us have not taken that into account, because a part of cognitive behavioral approach is to challenge that initial perception and to turn around and to recognize, wait a minute, I have been marketed, but the power inside of me as a divine being of God confronts, challenge, and rewrites that. And then if I'm rewriting that and negating that and ignoring that and reframing that and saying, as Dr. Thurman would say, I am a child of God and I am the being of God's presence in the world, and therefore I'm not going to allow these external forces to bastardize those perceptions, and I'm going to live that out. Then the second part, I'm going to manifest out who God has created us to be or created me to be, and therefore we will rewrite this reality.
That's so powerful what you're saying, because Pentecostals then are advantaged, in my opinion, because of the Pentecostal penchant for otherworldliness. What militates against what we have, what's been superimposed on us as this kind of commodification and marketed as such, is the leaning into the otherworldliness. That's what tongue speech does. It reminds us from the spirit out that we are not of this world. That's what trances and fits and visions and falling out in the spirit, spiritual engagement, spiritual encounter, prophecies. These things remind us that we are not, we are in this world, Bible readers, but not of this world. And as long as we keep being reminded of that, then it will reduce the effect of the commodification and the bill of goods that's been sold to us, and that we are no longer a part of. We don't participate in this commodifying chattel slave sale of our souls and our minds and our spirits.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I want to add to, just enhance and highlight and celebrate with you is just what you said. Because when you look at what Dr. Brueggemann said that when you look at these Apiru, Hebrew people that comes out, they are an amalgamation of marginalized people groups. In other words, they're not just, he said, go back and look at it, that mixed multitude. He said, they people groups that come, they are economically marginalized. And here's this God calling them to, and as he says, to go in and confront any system that negates an egalitarian, created communal self. He says, not about fighting ethnic groups. He said, because they are themselves diverse. He said, what it is you won't go into a city king system and replicate a city king system which causes you to extort those that are beneath you. He said, one of the things that gets Solomon in trouble is Solomon replicates a city king system where he overtaxes the people to the point that he brings in a caste divisive system, and God now is against them. So Pentecostalism, speaking in tongues, connecting prophetically, means to turn around, reclaim your humanity, see God alive in us, in the community, and to rewrite and to reconstruct and to not accept this. So I recognize that a car is a car to get me to a place. It is not a thing that is supposed to put me in bondage. A house provides shelter for me, not a house is going to dominate my time, my talents, and my ability. So I am no longer a thing, but I understand the resources that God has presented to me and to use them according to their purpose.
Yes and amen. Dr. May Alice Reggie says, in the African view, John Mbiti, the Kenyan African religious scholar, it says injustice is an offense against God, the people themselves who suffer from injustice, and against the departed members of the family or the ancestors. What an incredible worldview to carry. And perhaps that's the way forward for Christian spirituality. Perhaps Pentecostal spirituality, rooted in an African communal tradition, understands, as Brueggemann and Mbiti and Reggie and Johnson, that this African view of injustice is an offense to God, that it's an offense to those to whom the injustice is perpetrated and to the ancestors who left their children and grandchildren in the earth with a hope and expectation that the world was a just place.
Oh, I love Dr. Reggie because, boy, she laid that down. Because in order to create injustice, you got to negate the humanity and the purpose that God has ascribed in them. And that child is an extension of the ancestors and the promise that God made to the ancestors. So that's a violation against the covenantal God and the covenant. Go on, Dr. Reggie. You all right with me?
It is a total. I mean, I love the way you said that. It's a negation of the person, their ontological isness. It's an affront to the God that created that person. It's an affront to the hopes and proleptic future that person represents for the next generation and the next. We got a call from our spiritual father, Bishop Lafayette Scales, that one of our literally childhood friends and families, the Ridley family in Columbus, Ohio. I know the great-grandmother and the grandmother, the granddaughter and great-granddaughter, an 18-year-old girl just graduated high school with a full scholarship to Wilberforce University, that fine Methodist school there in Ohio, was gunned down in a drive-by shooting.
Oh, my God.
18-year-old in Columbus, Ohio. Now listen, Bishop Scales said to us, another asset, another community asset has been stripped from us. Because he understood it wasn't just her life that was her individual life taken from her, or her life as a part of her family taken from them, but her life and all of its potential and uniqueness and goodness and essence and beauty that was put in the earth by God, God's self, for the purposes of blessing the community, has been taken from the entire community. That's the injustice on multiple levels. And perhaps if Pentecostalism can advance a communal understanding and relationality of an integrated self, integrated families, and integrated cosmology, then perhaps we can look at the way we embrace life and the church and the world in a more integrated fashion. I don't know who is deriving value like I am, but if you are, I would that you would help us out tonight. I'm never too beyond asking for help, because I believe you have not because you ask not. I'm never beyond beyond affirming what I believe is of benefit and blessing to the broader community. And I know that Global Pentecostal Perspectives, by your engagement and interaction, is becoming such a blessing to so many of you. And I appreciate your affirmation in saying things like, we missed you, in saying things like, we're glad you're back, in affirming Dr. Johnson and all of the wisdom and insight that he brings on tonight, and the platform of GPP to be able to take it to a global audience. But one of the other ways that you can affirm, lift up, and assist is if you would consider, my dear friends, if you would just consider being of some financial blessing to GPP in some kind of way. Some of you have, others of you all are still thinking and contemplating. Perhaps you've heard enough. Perhaps you're convinced. Perhaps you know this message needs a broader platform. These type of conversations need to be placed in a broader setting, in a more expansive audience. Perhaps you know people that need to hear this kind of conversation, if for nothing else, not to convince them, but to just challenge them to think a little differently, to expose to a different way of thinking about themselves, the world, the faith, the church, Pentecostal spirituality. That's my hope. It's my expectation. I really am here to add a voice and a perspective, and various perspectives, to the broader ecclesial conversation. Dr. Johnson, we got about 4.5 minutes left. You gave me, I promised you an hour and a half, and you've given me that time. I want to give you the last 3 or 4 minutes to say or pray or prophesy to the waiting audience in ways that you're led by the Spirit. I can't thank you enough for taking the time, but I'm sincere when I say I'm going to make an offering to you, an offering of honor, an offering of friendship and brotherhood, an offering of appreciation from Global Pentecostal Perspectives. As the people are helping GPP, I want that to translate directly to be a blessing to you for your kindness and your expertise. You know, David Nicholson wrote the book in 2019, The Death of Expertise, and talked about how people like you and I and others are becoming a greater and greater minority because so many people reject and even despise expertise. They want to, the commodification process requires the denigration of expertise because it has to see someone as lesser than the self to be able to perpetuate or to perpetrate a kind of overbearing, kind of domineering commodification of the human personality. And you help us to break through every ceiling, every limitation, every debilitating word, action, and everything that's designed by the enemy himself to bring us down and hold us stagnant. Thank you for doing so on tonight. I'm going to let you have the last comments before I close us out tonight.
I really do want to thank you for this invitation. I sneak on here every now and then just to peep my head and then to hear my friends expound and espouse and translate the word. We definitely need that. I think one of the things that I pray, and I'm praying for this, is for you to be able to set a fire again. You know, Atlanta used to be the Mecca of African American preaching.
Yes, sir.
It used to be the Mecca of African American hermeneutical thought and interpretation. And we have been seduced by this popularism. It's kind of like the Pauline letter, who have bewitched you, but when you translate that in the Greek, it's who has seduced you. And so we've been seduced into this popularism. And this popularism, I think, Bishop, is just what you just said. The aspect of it is that as the Pauline writer turned around and said, he said, in the latter days, people shall select for themselves teachers who will feed them with smooth things. We don't like this kind of conversation or your kind of challenge, because what it really does or invites us to hold up a mirror, confront who we have become, who God has called us to be, and the distance between the two. and to decide if we're going to correct it. And in psychoanalytic and cognitive behavioral, to be real honest with you, that's what we do. I'm going to hold up a mirror and I'm going to say the choice is still yours. I'm going to use questioning, and I'm going to use respect, and I'm going to use honoring. But I'm going to sit back and say, if God has created you to be in the world, not to do, then how did you start doing? And what are you running from? And what are you masking? And unless you come and confront that mask, you're going to forever be, as Dr. Thurman would say, dancing at the end of strings that somebody else is pulling.
Wow.
So thank you.
Wow. Wow. Friends, Global Pentecostal Perspectives exists to bring this kind of insight, this kind of perspective, this kind of encouragement, this kind of expansive training. Dr. Johnson, where can the people connect with you, those perhaps who even necessitate counseling or know that they need to refer someone for counseling? Where can they connect with you in that way?
I presently work out of New Horizon Counseling Center. We are located at 6000 Live Oak Parkway, Suite 108A in Norcross, Georgia. And our number is 678-291-9029. And I and my colleague, Dr. Louis Kola, we are constantly trying to engage in the work and the care of the soul.
Outstanding. And you are available and open for conferences, preaching. He's a preacher par excellence. He's a conference presenter par excellence for teaching classes within churches, for all sorts of educational and pastoral, expansive and creative opportunities that Dr. Johnson can both lead and facilitate for you and yours as his time would permit. And I would encourage you to reach out to him in that way. He is a valuable, valuable resource to our community, the Christian community and the world. And so I want to challenge and give you the opportunity to do so on tonight. Remember, the symposium on Pentecostal spiritual formation is forthcoming August 20th and 21st. Make ready at the ridiculously low registration cost of $79. The ridiculously low price. I'm giving it away at $79 for Bishop Johnathan Alvarado, Dr. Tony Alvarado, Dr. James Bowers for a 2-day symposium, a 1 CEU symposium, continuing education unit you'll receive from the Greater Atlanta Theological Seminary. And so it's co-sponsored by the GPP and GATS. We want to encourage you. The link for registration will be up next week. Want to encourage you to start preparing to register and be a part of that symposium. Want to encourage you to meet us here over these next several weeks, because we are indeed going to have wonderful guests, as we've described before, that'll be on with us. And we are looking forward to our second year of Global Pentecostal Perspectives, bringing you this message, this insight, and these perspectives to vivify and animate our Christian walk with the Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks for being on tonight. Thank you. Worship, find a place of worship tomorrow. Find a house of worship and worship the Lord on tomorrow. Meet us at 11:30 on the live stream of Grace Church International, and we would love to see you there next week, this same time on Global Pentecostal Perspectives.